This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and this is Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife advocates and animal lovers, brought to you by the Fur Bearers. There are few mammals who are as outwardly tough and intimidating as Gulo Gulo, the wolverine. These solitary individuals are considered a species of special concern federally and threatened in some jurisdictions like Ontario. And they're notoriously difficult to monitor or track for scientific purposes. But modern technology is changing that. The combined use of digital photography and videography with unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones, is creating opportunities to track and hone in on the specific areas that wolverines may be using as a home base. With that knowledge, researchers and managers are able to create land use recommendations that protect the much-needed space of wolverines and ultimately help individuals, as well as the entire species, thrive. A recent project undertaken by ecologist and wolverine researcher Nikki Heim, along with UAV professional Alex Taylor, utilized this method. A quick disclosure, the Fur Bearers did provide partial funding for this project, and you can read more about our involvement at thefurbearers.com. Nikki and Alex joined Defender Radio to explain how the convergence of their skills is offering new hope for protecting wolverines, the limits and importance of ethical use of UAVs, and what comes next in their project. All right, well, I think the logical place for us to start today is to ask the question of what was the concept behind this? Because we've got kind of two interesting things we're talking about. We're talking about wolverine ecology, and we're also talking about I don't want to use the word surveillance, but I think it's the technical term, the observation and attempting to locate sites and things like that for the purposes of protection and management. So how does this start? Does this start as trying to identify the den sites, or does it start as we've got this tech, what are the ways we can apply it?
I would say that it starts, well, for me anyways, it started more from the interest in finding den sites and then realizing there's a technology that with more efficiency and less disturbance. So I think it started more at, yeah.
That makes sense. Not all the first questions are great questions. I'll own that. So let's talk a bit about wolverines. Wolverines are one of these animals that I feel like a lot of us have heard of, obviously thanks to Mr. Jackman and the Marvel Cinematic Universe and various other publications. But the actual animal is one that I don't think most Canadians will ever see outside of confinement. Yet they are an elusive and important, I believe, mesopredator. Is that accurate?
Yep, that's accurate. Yeah, very few people see them. Yes, particularly in the southern parts of Canada. You get a lot more people seeing them up in the Northwest Territories and the northern parts of Canada. But yeah, I think for most of us that live in the south, wolverines are considered a very mysterious and elusive animal.
Yeah, I remember reading articles about, someone trying to they set out something like 20 camera traps and hoped to catch one somewhere in Alberta at one point. And it is astounding to me that we have wildlife in this country that, with the technology we've had up until the last several years, has been extraordinarily difficult to track. What is it about wolverines that makes them so elusive to humans compared to other animals who fill kind of similar roles in the ecosystem?
Well, for one, they occur really low densities. So just as a byproduct of just there not being very many of them and only few per 1,000 square kilometers. They're just, wow. You don't see them very often. And then they are sensitive to humans. They make a point in kind of staying away from us. So it's sort of twofold. There aren't very many, and then they spend time in places where we don't. They spend a lot of time in high elevation mountainous areas and glaciers, and then just generally speaking, kind of avoid us. So you can see one from a distance and they'll probably head the other direction. So just their aversion to being around high densities of people and then their low density population is kind of a combination of those two.
Sounds like they've kind of figured us out, humans. Uh, Are they specialists? Are they of a species that requires those very specific locations? I would look to a Canada lynx maybe as another specialist where they evolved in a very specific type of terrain, and then their entire life cycle is around that kind of terrain. Is it similar for wolverines?
No, not so much. They would be more on the generalist scale of the spectrum, I would say.
Oh.
They have specific habitat types that they're narrowed into, more that kind of northern, colder regions. But they have a wide range of
Hmm.
prey that they can feed on. A lot of people associate with them with being in high elevation mountainous areas, but they're found all the way to the coast. There's images of them feeding on salmon, so anything from caribou to salmon. They're largely a scavenger, so they can eat a lot of different prey.
That's awesome. They sound like incredible animals, but they, as you said, they don't seem to like people that much. And I guess that's one of the reasons why you need to identify where they are. And my understanding is the intent of knowing where the den sites may be is less about just wanting to know, but it actually has management implications for how we develop and how we plan in territories where they may be. Uh, what is the importance of identifying den sites? How does that play into all of it?
Well, for a lot of species, those denning areas and where they have their young are kind of considered critical habitats. It's really, if they don't have a protected, safe space to have their young, then the populations are really negatively impacted. Um, and for wolverines and other species, so the other thing about a wolverine is that they have extremely large home ranges. They can travel great distances when they want to and spend a lot of time moving and traveling. And so, from a management perspective, when you're trying to narrow in on areas for conservation concern, it can be really difficult when they can move and utilize such a huge landscape. So, identifying some of those really critical sites for their reproductive success can be especially important when you're trying to look at a large area for management and say, okay, what areas do we really want to prioritize protection for this species? And that can really help with management directives when you can key in on those priority areas rather than saying, this whole area, you need to protect it all. That
That
it's
makes
a harder
sense.
sell.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. And I imagine you're also then dealing with getting away from the use of modeling data, which isn't always as reliable when we're looking at populations and distribution of wildlife. I know that was a big thing in BC. Again, tangential and not the same, but realizing with grizzly bear counts, this came out in an Auditor General report. So they were relying on modeling, and then at the local level, they were saying, "Well, I don't think that's right." And what the Auditor General report more or less pointed out is, yeah, we've got some modeling and some guesswork, and at the end of the day, we don't actually know. And I imagine that being able to do something like this then actually gives you a more realistic, a more accurate, or even micro level look at a geographic range and whether or not there are wolverines or potentially other wildlife that are in need of protection under Coswick, I believe it is.
Yeah, so we can identify kind of general habitat characteristics that you would feed into models to say, these areas are potentially critical and potentially used for denning. And so then you can produce those models from those habitat characteristics. And there's been more work in Europe and Scandinavia on locating den sites from telemetry work than has been in Canada.
Mm.
So that's where you can kind of start narrowing in on where you might find the dens. But actually being able to find them and really narrowing in, like you said, on those micro sites is really important.
And I'm going to get right away to how we then do that, because I think this is a really cool combination of different types of knowledge and expertise. Do want to check, though, when you're doing this kind of work, you don't then go out and say, hey, everyone, this is where the Wolverine den is. Is that accurate to
Yeah,
say?
that's not something that we really want to share information on. Them being, again,
Yeah.
really sensitive animals to human disturbance. And then these real critical sites where they're having their young, they're going to be particularly sensitive to human disturbance when they have their young, like most species are. Um, And so we don't want people getting close to try and see the young or take photos. So it's important from a management perspective and to work with either local management or in this case, local operators. But yeah, it's not something we want to broadcast to the greater.
Yeah. That's always a concern that we hear about from folks is, well, as soon as you know where they are, someone's going to go and try and kill them. But I think that is maybe a little less, that happens with a little less frequency than people may suspect. And
in some cases they might want to trap, but in other cases, say in a national park or something like that, the disturbance is actually more from, the interest to seeing them or taking photos of them.
Yeah, and you would think folks would think, okay, well, this is an animal that was the designation for an assassin regenerative man with giant adamantium claws. Maybe a selfie isn't a great idea. But I've also written the article, Bear Selfies Are a Bad Idea. So I'm going to just assume maybe we need to remind folks that, if you see a wolverine in the wild, keep your distance. Just general advice. Now, so we know general area. You've talked about how you can use modeling to sort of, all right, we know these kinds of characteristics on the land, possibly in the ecosystem you're looking at, and you narrow it down to where you think they're going to be. How do you then proceed? How does Alex and the drone get involved in this part of it?
Nikki and I met years ago on a Wolverine study that was sort of the start of Nikki's master's work as well, where we were skiing around the backcountry, setting up DNA bait sites for Wolverines, and kept in touch ever since. And we both worked for Parks Canada for a time. And I'd started flying drones and more recently started a drone services company. Researcher in the interior of BC, I forget her last name.
Hausenleiter.
Yeah, had initiated the idea of using drones to identify Wolverine den sites. And so we started to talk about the possibility of doing that sort of in the eastern Rockies, and then started looking for opportunities, because it starts out being literally a needle in a haystack kind of situation. Seeing Wolverines is a rare event. Knowing where they are at any one time is definitely a needle in a haystack. And then another order of magnitude of scarcity is knowing where their den sites might be. So it all starts out with reports of tracks, and the more tracks in the spring during the sort of the later denning period might be indicative of a den in the area. And so then one could just travel around looking for the den site, but you risk disturbance. You could fly around in a helicopter, but that's even more disturbance and cost prohibitive. So using Doris's lead, we came up with a possible location just inside BC in the Talus Lodge area, and worked with the owners of the lodge, Sarah Renner and Thomas Grandy, to see if we could do some testing of the technology and see if we can follow the tracks from the air and possibly identify den sites. And it was successful on our first go.
Yeah, that's very cool. And when I first heard about this, I was wondering, well, are you just going to look for Wolverines? And I imagine, they don't have mailboxes out, so you can be like, there he is. So what is it that as you said, it's a needle in a haystack. And if you're doing it during winter, just driving in winter makes me snowblind. So looking at a monitor, it must be, you must have stock in Advil, first of all, but then what are you specifically looking for to identify them? And how do you make sure it's a Wolverine and not a bear or a really, really big raccoon?
Right. Should I answer that, Nikki?
Sure, go ahead. Jump in.
Well, there are a lot of variables at play. to answer your question. So the first thing is we're increasing the probability of success by focusing on an area that has wolverine tracks in the snow to begin with. And then we're definitely trying not to disturb the wolverines, because the den sites in particular are susceptible to disturbance, and there's the possibility that if one disturbs the den, the mother might move the kits, and that could result in a lower survivorship. But we're looking for tracks usually in a ski touring mode. So we'll ski mountaineering in the subalpine and the alpine, and we're not actually looking to see the animals themselves. We're using the drone to sort of, if we have a rough idea where the tracks are leading, we'll then use the drone to do a systematic mapping of an area that might be a few hectares in size, and then we'll quickly look at those images and the processed map to focus in on where the den might be, and even return to it a slightly later date to then hone in with the drone. And so you're right there. There's a lot of looking at white images, but there's also a lot of micro topography, trees, rocks, etc., that provide shading and contrast to pick up the tracks. But it is a challenge for sure.
Yeah, that's very cool sounding. Nikki, is there things that you look for, or ways that you help with your knowledge of wolverines in the ecosystems to narrow that down or help with the processing of that?
Yeah, well, I guess just to back up a little bit before we can get to the place where we're finding tracks. Well, one of the real benefits of what we were able to do this winter, and what Doris Hasenleiter and also Andrea Cotello in BC have been doing, is connecting with people that are out on the landscape more often. So you've got a lot of operators like Talus Lodge operators where they're either heli lodges or ski lodges, or you can put out surveys to public to report tracks. Because we're not out there all the time, it's really, when they move across an area, you see the tracks, and then the wind blows, tracks are gone. So yep. It can be really challenging to kind of even get to that place. And so there's kind of a couple things even to get to the starting point where you'd want to fly the drone. So first, kind of working with operators like we were able to with Talus Lodge. They've been seeing wolverines and wolverine tracks up there for years, and also in pairs, so more than one together. And then looking at the habitat attributes around the lodge, there was a lot of things about that area that jumped out to me. So, the talus boulders, north-facing slopes, high elevation, so it holds snow for longer into the spring. There's a marmot colony, which is a great prey source for a female wolverine. So those things kind of, before you go out to even start the searches, it's like that's a potentially a good area. And then you find out that there's wolverine tracks. Great. Okay, let's go have a look. So that's kind of what got us to that area as well, was the habitat attributes that we know tend to be selected for by wolverines, and then having the sightings and having those reports of the tracks really allows you to start honing in on some of those search areas.
Yeah, it's a very full investigative workup that the two of you have to put into this. It is really cool to hear about, because it's not just, all right, well, throw the drone up in the air and, well, there's a wolverine, job done. It really is gathering evidence from different sources and then compiling that with your modeling data and just sort of consistently getting, you can't see it, again, problem with Zoom these days. I am making hand gestures that you're getting closer and closer and closer in to where they might be. Then you send up the drone to really start pulling in the data from the ground from above. And that sounds very cool. And I guess, you had mentioned, Alex, and this is something I think is very important to talk about. and I'd like both of your perspectives on this, is the drone itself. As you said, a helicopter makes a lot of disturbance. Anyone who's, I have not been up in one, but as a journalist, I was around the orange helicopters here in Ontario, which are the emergency air ones, and I've been on the ground when they've landed in. You know there's a helicopter by the time it gets within about 50 yards of you. Like, it's extraordinarily loud. Everything's blowing around. There's people waving their arms around if you're in an urban area with pylons. I don't think you would necessarily have that in a wildlife situation. So it is very disturbing. But a drone, and I guess this is sort of a two-parter. One, when we're talking about a drone, what are we talking about? Because, my first thought is the dinky things everyone got at Christmas 5 years ago from Radio Shack for $20. And then I think, oh, they wouldn't use that. And I go back to, Obama firing drone strikes. And I don't think it's going to be the same as that either. So where in the middle are we meeting on what these drones are? I guess we'll go with that.
That's an excellent question, because the word drone, as you say, does cover a very wide spectrum of possible technology. And so it's actually a lot closer to the toy you got from Radio Shack 5 years ago. But the technology has improved dramatically to be able to do a lot of things in small packages, I guess. And for this particular project, we used the Mavic 2 Pro, which is a relatively small drone, weighs a couple of pounds, and easily fits in the backpack, and with extra batteries and things. And you can ski around with it in your backpack and not be hauling too much of a load. But it also is relatively quiet, which is important for that disturbance factor. And once the drone is 20, 30 meters away, the sound is minimal to non-existent. And it provides an excellent quality image, and is relatively easy to fly. So all those factors combine to make it a really useful tool. And what you're getting is a camera in the sky for that aerial perspective. That's what makes the difference. So you can do it without of an actual helicopter, which is both very loud and expensive. But there are also a lot of them in BC with heli skiing and other things like that. And the drone really is a great tool for that kind of work.
And when we talk about the disturbances too, there is obviously going to be the ethical component of any work you do in this regard, but there is also legal components in regards to using UAVs now. What are the considerations that you as a team have to work on, and where are the regulations, and then what are additional considerations you give this before going out and doing it?
I'll start with the regulatory side, and Nikki can maybe jump in at the end. But first of all, I'm Transport Canada certified to the advanced level. I also am a flight reviewer, have hundreds of hours experience. So there are different levels of regulation. The Transport Canada regulates drones as aircraft. So that's the certification there. And then there's regional regulations. So whether you're flying on Crown land, provincial parks or national parks, or in municipalities, there are going to be, or in proximity to airports and heliports, there's going to be regulations involved. And the certification process, in that process, you learn about how to fly legally and safely in those jurisdictions. In this case, we were in BC Crown land, but the final level of consideration is the landowner. And it's often one of the more important ones. So in this case, it wasn't a landowner, but it was a leaseholder for a recreational lodge that were flying in their territory. Legally, we wouldn't need their permission, but they were being extremely helpful and collaborative in letting us stay at the lodge and also providing us information. But beyond that sort of legal stuff, Nikki, did you want to comment on some of those considerations?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a flight distance too that we're legally bound to. Well, often in some areas, like how far you can fly the drone away from your standing, for example. So that also, you want to consider access. So if we think we can, you're doing this skiing, so if there's a basin or an area you want to fly, you having, and where you think you can ski as far into, you want to give some of that consideration too. In this case, like Alex mentioned, we were really fortunate to have incredible support from Talus Lodge, and we were able to fly kind of right from the areas that we were hoping for. So logistically, it was good for this situation. We were able to get in there, and we didn't have to fly outside of that area that we probably shouldn't be flying. And then from a wildlife point of view, we were able to stay at a height that kind of minimized the disturbance. We also were in a really good position where we happened to get excellent weather, I think, which really helped too. It's, it's all sometimes just, there's lots of balls in the air, and, it's like, do you see the tracks? Is it snowing? Is it windy? Is it sunny? And yeah, we were really fortunate this year. Everything sort of lined up for us. And So yeah, it's great.
And because
I love when that happens.
It's a relatively new investigative method. We're also sort of by trial and error building the methodology and seeing what works and what doesn't. So things like the light and the weather, as Nikki mentioned, really important to be able to distinguish, the light gray impressions in the snow, and everything else is white. That can sometimes be difficult. And if it starts snowing or raining, then you can't fly too much, or if the wind is too high, you can't fly. If the avalanche conditions are risk is too high, you can't, travel to the area that you want to fly in. So things like that. But it very much a trial and error process where we're trying to build best practices with this new technology.
And that's very cool. And I think it's a kind of learn by doing scenario. And fortunately, the two of you seem like a very good team on something like that. And also just looking at the Raven West website, which is, for listeners, Alex's company. And you start looking at the services, and I was thinking about that and saying, well, most of the folks I know who have done drone stuff, I was in media, so I know some folks who they train specifically to do that. Spencer Campbell, who does a lot of our Wildlife Wednesday videos and helps me out behind the scenes for the Fur Bears. He's learning how to use drone stuff. He's a camera operator and film guy. And then looking at this and seeing, so you've got the environmental management and scientific research, which is what we're talking about. But then you also have stuff like search and rescue, fire and emergency management, and other services. And you start to realize that the technology, this is the kind of stuff that if we had it 50 years ago, outcomes of major natural disasters and of other big ecological things could have been different, because you can access quickly and rapidly and from different angles and stuff without putting people in the line of fire, so to speak.
Yeah, and because it's a new technology where you're getting a camera in the sky sort of relatively quickly and cheaply from a portable device, it's really about bringing your own personal experience in, or when people bring their own backgrounds and experience and expertise in, that all these different new applications come about. And the services we provide at Raven West are a direct result of my previous careers and experience and seeing where the tool can be used. And the same with Nikki, her field research has evolved through other experiences, and the drone has come to be a tool of many for her.
Yeah, and I recommend anyone who's interested in this. Raven West does, you do certifications. As you mentioned, you're a flight reviewer qualified, but you've also got training on drone imaging, mapping software, applications for scientists, environmental land resource managers, gardens, programs, conservation authorities, industry, and more. So it is very cool. And certainly something to check out. And again, I think it's one of those ones where we have to, and I am going to repeat, do not go out, get a drone and fly it over your local forest looking for wildlife. Probably not going to go well for anybody. So now that we've got this, you've gotten some looks at this, you figured out where a den site likely is as a result of using this combination of ecology and surveillance tools. What happens next, Nikki? Now that you've assembled a report that outlines what you found, you'll be able to share the methodology, which I think is very cool, as Alex pointed out. And this could be a tool used elsewhere. So what happens now that you've identified that?
Well, I think the first next will be going back in the summer to confirm the den site. And then again, the advantage of working directly with an operator in the area is that we can provide mitigation recommendations for this area and do some more monitoring. So I think our first next step is to work very closely with the owners of Talus Lodge, who are totally on board, which is great. And so that's a fantastic partnership to have developed. And we want to monitor to see if this wolverine actually uses the site in subsequent years. So she comes back and uses the den again in a couple of years. If she does, that would be great because we can really hone in on mitigations to protect that area. So first next steps are kind of coming up with that mitigation plan and monitoring plan, working with the lodge. And that's exciting because if that wolverine has already felt that that area is safe enough for her to have her young, then hopefully she keeps doing so. And we can work with the lodge owners to keep it safe for her.
I think it's very cool, and this is another great application, is for folks like a lodge owner. It sounds like Talus Lodge, which I believe is a ski lodge of some sort in the high alpine Rocky Mountains, the meta-analysis of their website says. And I think that's, though, a very cool tool because if you are trying to be a responsible ecotourism operator, to be able to bring in, say, for instance, your team, the two of you, or another combination of operator and researcher, and say, all right, this is my land. Where am I going to have the least impact by sending people on walking tours or on trails, or if I want to cut out a BMX track? Because that's been one of the huge issues with planning, and we're seeing this a lot in Ontario and BC and Alberta and everywhere else, is, yeah, people want to get outside and use this natural space, but when people go into natural spaces, it changes the ecosystem, and it's hard to show that sometimes. So I imagine that, again, this is a tool now in the belt moving forward for so many different people in so many different situations that'll be really exciting in terms of management implications.
Yeah, and I might just add to the management implications because we obviously, you often focus on mitigation tools and management, and but also the education. So there's this really great opportunity for, like you said, more of in an ecotourism lens that they can share this information and say, we have wolverines up here. We even have a female that's having her young. And so it can provide sort of that education and stewardship piece that sometimes can be more effective than management planning, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's great.
That these ideas that we're working on can be applied quite simply elsewhere. And there's a direct relationship between if a lodge operator or a heli ski operator knows that there's a wolverine den in this particular valley, then they can make the choice to avoid that and properly contribute to the success of that individuals and those species. And that's a very straightforward sort of detection to action line that doesn't need government policy or large campaigns or blockades.
Yeah, well, that's a great point because it does take, without diving into politics too much, it can take an extraordinary, and as again, someone who covers these issues, a truly extraordinary community effort to protect some areas. And in this situation, to be able to then, as you said, show rather than just say, oh, we think there's stuff here and we want to protect it, or there could be stuff here and we want to protect it. To be able to say, there's a Wolverine here and they are protected under this legislation, so let's figure out how to do this together. And also, to Nikki's point of the education aspect and reframing, that is really cool. I was talking with Dr. Sarah Dubois about wildlife feeding, and I'm not sure in which order these episodes will come out. So if that one's already out, go back and listen. If not, stay tuned. And she was sharing with me about a situation where on a pier, people were feeding birds, and they kept saying, please stop feeding the birds. It's not good for them. It causes problems, on and on and on. And when they changed the language to feeding these birds is unhealthy and is considered animal cruelty, all of a sudden, it was not an abstract idea of a thing you should or shouldn't do. It was a consequence to the action. And people immediately can get on board with that because, oh, what I'm doing is actually causing harm. And there's evidence of this, and I'm using language I'm familiar with. So it sounds like, and again, it's one of these being able to show the problem and identify very specific things can really build an argument out, or be used against us in the future too.
Yeah, and I think too, to build off that a little bit is I think often we're saying, no, you can't do this, you can't go there, you know, and it's difficult. That's, people don't respond very well to that. So I think trying to encourage that coexistence idea that, okay, well, you can be out here in this landscape, but let's try and do this, this, and this, and then we can keep these wild species on the landscape while we also enjoy it too. And that's a really tricky balance to find, but I think it's one that people can probably get more on board with, as if they can feel like they're part of the solution, you know, rather than the problem.
100%. And when you give people that agency, very often you see them use it. It's as simple as putting a garbage can outside a convenience store where there's litter. It's the same kind of thing. If you put a garbage can there, people are more likely to use it. If there isn't a garbage can, they just throw stuff on. Well, at least in Hamilton. I don't know about the rest of the country, but we do have garbage everywhere.
Yeah, just an aside, one of the unique things about this site that Nikki and I have been working on is it's directly south of Assiniboine Provincial Park and west of Banff National Park. And to the west of it, there's logging and other industrial uses. So it's in this really interesting bit of habitat that has protection all around it and industrial extraction close to it. And the Wolverines have decided that this is a safe place for them, even though the location itself isn't protected.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. The Algonquin wolf. This is just the one I'm most familiar with here in Ontario. Is a unique species that's been identified. That's about 100 years old, and it's a combination of I want to say gray wolves from Ontario and western coyotes, and they are a distinct species now, and they have protections in Ontario around Algonquin Provincial Park and a couple of other areas. But then there's these huge gaps, and we know they travel back and forth between them. And again, another use of the technology to be able to say, no, look, literally, there goes one of the wolves from buffer, like past the buffer into the next one. So we need to protect this strip. Again, I think it gives that scientific argument more merit with evidence, I guess.
Without viable habitat, these species won't survive. It's that simple.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to wrap up, speaking of solutions, folks who want to learn more about this, or people who are coming up, we have a lot of younger listeners who are in the sciences and academia who are interested in learning more about both the work you're doing, Nikki, on Wolverine specifically, and the two of you have put together in this report, and I think the combination, I'll give both of you space on this one because you both come at it from different places, but as an ecologist, what can people do to sort of get to what you're doing and be supportive of it? And Alex, as an operator and a pilot, what can people do to kind of get involved and support it? Oh, and Alex, you go first. I'm just going to call it out because you both looked at me at the same time and Zoom.
Can you state the question again, please?
Yeah, what can people do? So, folks who are coming up, or people who have different interests, who want to be involved in what you do, or supportive of this type of work, and I think particularly in terms of the scientific applications, search and rescue applications, where's a good starting place for them to go to kind of learn more, get their feet wet, and be supportive?
Right. Well, it's always a hard thing to describe the leap from starting to where we are now, because it's taken so many turns and iterations and little failures and as well as successes. But in terms of drones, if you know somebody who flies, ask them to show you how it all works and get your hands on the controls. And what sold me about 8 years ago when I first saw a drone in use was the imagery, that was so incredible, that aerial perspective. But because drones are regulated as aircraft, there is consideration for getting properly trained and certified and taking it from there. And really, it's as important as your experiences and skills outside the drone realm as to whether or not you're going to be helpful or successful in the drone world itself. So just being able to fly a drone doesn't mean you're going to have success. You have to combine it with other skills usually.
Yeah, and again, the Raven West website, I'll link to it, ravenwest.ca.
Sure.
You do offer a lot of those services, and I think it's even if you just want to see cool pictures of drones in action, right? Check it out.
Yeah. And glad to answer anybody's questions.
Awesome. And Nikki, on your side, I imagine you have a somewhat traditional academic sort of upbringing through this. No, I'm getting a big head shake. No, all right, let's hear the story. Were you in clown school at some point?
Oh, I think Alex is making fun.
Okay.
Mine is fairly traditional, maybe with a few bumps along the road. But no, I went and I took a technical diploma when I was in my early 20s, and that gave me a lot of the field skills that really set me up quite well. And then more traditionally went and got my bachelor's in natural resource science, and then my master's in environmental studies, which is when I really focused in on wolverines during that time. So I kind of came through that, I guess, in that traditional academic path, but also just kind of finding what excites you. And I was able to find that along the way, and I'm really grateful for that. And the path wasn't really linear. So to those people that want to get into this, I mean, I think what I did when I was in my technical diploma even was just volunteer for anything that I could kind of hear of and see if that resonated with me. And the wildlife studies really did. And so I kept trying to pursue that line of work, and it's led me in a lot of ways I couldn't imagine, including this. As well as even, seeing a presentation with good friends and colleagues of, collaborators like Doris and Andrea and the Coonies. I saw what they were doing, and I was like, that's cool. Let's give it a try. Let's try this over here. And working really closely with people is huge. It takes a big effort, and I think that's a really important piece too. Is to be open to working and collaborating with people. As far as finding information and like how people might be able to help in different capacities, like I mentioned, a lot of the work that's being done right now is really driven by and supported by the sightings that come in. So there's a lot of people out in the landscape these days, and it's really advantageous for us to have those sightings come in. And there is a website, it's called wolverinewatch.org, and it houses a lot of the work that's been done in the last decade. So I would direct people to that website. It's not a website that I'm driving, but it's one that a lot of the information that has come out of my work and many others is housed on that website. And it's also a website where you can report your sightings. So whether it be just sightings of tracks or sightings of individuals, people can go to that website and participate and support.
Yeah, this is I just loaded the website. It's very cool. It's got this awesome the tracking system in here is very thorough. Under the Wolverine tracks, it's how do you know if the tracks you've seen are from a Wolverine? There's a video, there's photos comparing it to different animal tracks. That's very cool.
Yeah.
The research is all here on different subject matters, publications. The team. Oh, there we go.
And I can.
So yeah, this is a cool website.
To Miriam Barreto and Tony Clevenger, they really got that started, and you know, we've all been working together for a lot of years, but that website has come a long way. She's done a great job.
Also, the fact that under the team, Gulo has a little listing, and it says very strong and great ultra distance runner, which is just very cute.
That's Miriam, yeah.
Yeah.
Not me.
To read the preliminary report created by Nikki Heim and Alex Taylor, check the links in this week's show notes on your podcast app or visit defenderradio.com. You can learn more about Wolverine research in North America at wolverinewatch.org and more about Alex Taylor and the responsible use of UAVs via Raven West Limited at ravenwest.ca. I want to thank Nikki and Alex for sharing their time with me and all of you for listening. You can engage with the podcast, have your questions asked and answered online or offline, learn about contests, and help me decide on upcoming episodes and guests by following at Howie Michael on Instagram and the Defender Radio podcast page on Facebook. The Fur Bears can also be found across social channels. Folks, we're wrapping up summer in the coming weeks, and as promised, the first episode of The Switch will be hitting your podcast feed soon. To get notified of new episodes of this new show, as well as Defender Radio, be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast wherever you listen, and sign up for email alerts at thefurbears.com. I can't wait to share with you what we've been creating. Until next time, I'm Michael Howie for Defender Radio and the Fur Bearers, reminding you to be kind and to stay informed and stay strong.